Hey, Elena, thank you for introducing the topic of suffering and grief for our first office hours session. I know that in my experience teaching undergrads, routinely students would show up at my office. It was a cubicle during office hours, and oftentimes um, would share some of their personal struggles with me. And, I think another person would think that they were trying to, sucker me into, I don't know, giving them an assignment extension or whatever. But I think that school is very different. Undergrad is very different. Now looks very different than what it looked like when I was in school. I started school in the early 90s, so I appreciate that. I really, really loved the quote that you shared with us from the Epstein book. And thank you for introducing that book to me about grief that says, grief turns over and over. It is vibrant, surprising, and alive, just as we are. I love it because I think I always think about grief and experience it and imagine it as a weight on top of me. And sometimes indeed that is what it feels like, but I really love this. I'm able to change my thinking about grief a lot through this quote, so thank you for that. I've been thinking a lot as the academic year begins um, about just the importance of acknowledging suffering and not avoiding it, and like the Epstein book tells us to, that the only way out is through it. We have to live through it. So, in that spirit, for the first class that I taught this academic year, I started our class time together with an anonymous check in and asked the students how they were feeling about beginning their graduate work. And there was a very broad variety of responses, and from some of the responses, it was very clear to me that some of the students are struggling. Um, and we just started the academic year, so I mean, there's a lot of suffering right now for sure. And so it was hard for me to a not turn away from that and ignore it, and b not say something or try and do something to fix that. I think that's a lot. That's a reflex that a lot of us have when we feel something uncomfortable is to fix it. So what's left after that is just simply acknowledging that. So uh, when I think about my own experience in graduate school and how challenging it was, mostly the initial shock, I think of just the intensity of the work and the steepness of the learning curve, where all of a sudden the bar is just so high. I think I was successful in part because I had a very strong social network that understood what that work was like, and I'm going to remind myself throughout the academic year that not all students have that. So something I want to end on is I'll just share a book that your book reminded me of that's related, but I think a different approach because I started reading the Epstein book, which is Radical Acceptance, and this is a Tara Brach book. And something that I really loved from this book is that she says a way that we can acknowledge our own suffering when we're struggling is simply by telling ourselves, I care about this suffering. And I have practiced that and I find it very powerful. And I think that's just another way for us to be present with ourselves and others and just to stick with it and not turn away. And so I am thinking about, how can I continue this practice of kindness with myself so that in turn, I can model that for students and then also, hold space for them and their experience this semester. So thank you for this great topic, and I would also love to hear in the comments from anyone who has an experience they'd like to share. Until next week.